However, both the incidence and impact of epidemics have gone down dramatically in the last few decades. In particular, global child mortality is at all-time low. Less than 5% of children die before reaching adulthood. In the developed world, the rate is less than 1%. This miracle is due to the unprecedented achievements of 20th century medicine, which has provided us with vaccinations, antibiotics, improved hygiene, and a much better medical infrastructure. For example, a global campaign of smallpox vaccination was so successful that in 1979, the World Health Organization declared that humanity had won, and that smallpox had been completely eradicated. It was the first epidemic humans had ever managed to wipe off the face of the earth. In 1967, smallpox had still infected 15 million people and killed 2 million of them. But in 2014, not a single person was either infected or killed by smallpox. The victory has been so complete that today the WHO has stopped vaccinating humans against smallpox. Every few years, we are alarmed by the outbreak of some potential new plague, such as SARS in 2002 and 3, bird flu in 2005, swine flu in 2009 and 10, and Ebola in 2014. Yet thanks to efficient countermeasures, these incidents have so far resulted in a comparatively small number of victims. SARS, for example, initially raised fears of a new Black Death, but eventually ended with the death of less than 1,000 people worldwide. The Ebola outbreak in West Africa seemed at first to spiral out of control, and on 26 September 2014, the WHO described it as the most severe public health emergency seen in modern times. Nevertheless, by early 2015, the epidemic had been reined in, and in January 2016, the WHO declared it over. It infected 30,000 people, killing 11,000 of them, caused massive economic damage throughout West Africa, and sent shockwaves of anxiety across the world. But it did not spread beyond West Africa, and its death toll was nowhere near the scale of the Spanish flu or the Mexican smallpox epidemic. Even the tragedy of AIDS, seemingly the greatest medical failure of the last few decades, can be seen as a sign of progress. Since its first major outbreak in the early 1980s, more than 30 million people have died of AIDS, and tens of millions more have suffered debilitating physical and psychological damage. It was hard to understand and treat the new epidemic because AIDS is a uniquely devious disease. Whereas a human infected with the smallpox virus dies within a few days, an HIV-positive patient may seem perfectly healthy for weeks and months, yet go on infecting others unknowingly. In addition, the HIV virus itself does not kill. Rather, it destroys the immune system, thereby exposing the patient to numerous other diseases. It is these secondary diseases that actually kill AIDS victims. Consequently, when AIDS began to spread, it was especially difficult to understand what was happening. When two patients were admitted to a New York hospital in 1981, one ostensibly dying from pneumonia and the other from cancer, it was not at all evident that both were in fact victims of the HIV virus, which may have infected them months or even years previously. However, despite these difficulties, after the medical community became aware of the mysterious new plague, it took scientists just 2 years to identify it, understand how the virus spreads, and suggest effective ways to slow down the epidemic. Within another 10 years, new medicines turned AIDS from a death sentence into a chronic condition, at least for those wealthy enough to afford the treatment. Just think, what would have happened if AIDS had erupted in 1581 rather than 1981? In all likelihood, nobody back then would have figured out what caused the epidemic, how it moved from person to person, or how it could be halted, let alone cured. Under such conditions, AIDS might have killed a much larger proportion of the human race, equaling and perhaps even surpassing the Black Death. Despite the horrendous toll AIDS has taken, and despite the millions killed each year by long-established infectious diseases such as malaria, epidemics are a far smaller threat to human health today than in previous millennia. The vast majority of people died from non-infectious illnesses such as cancer and heart disease, or simply from old age. Incidentally, cancer and heart disease are of course not new illnesses, they go back to antiquity. In previous eras, however, relatively few people lived long enough to die from them. Many fear that this is only a temporary victory and that some unknown cousin of the Black Death is waiting just around the corner. No one can guarantee that plagues won't make a comeback, but there are good reasons to think that in the arms race between doctors and germs, doctors run faster. New infectious diseases appear mainly as a result of chance mutations in pathogen genomes. These mutations allow the pathogens to jump from animals to humans to overcome the human immune system, or to resist medicines such as antibiotics. Today, such mutations probably occur and disseminate faster than in past, due to human impact on the environment. Yet in the race against medicine, pathogens ultimately depend on the blind hand of fortune. Doctors, in contrast, count on more than mere luck. Though science owns a huge debt to serendipity, doctors don't just throw different chemicals into test tubes, hoping to chance upon some new medicine. With each passing year, doctors accumulate more and better knowledge, which they use in order to design more effective medicines and treatments. Consequently, though in 2015 we will undoubtedly face much more resilient germs, medicine in 2050 will likely be able to deal with them more efficiently than today. In 2015, doctors announced the discovery of a completely new type of antibiotic, Teixobactin, to which bacteria have no resistance as yet. Some scholars believe Teixobactin may prove to be a game changer in the fight against highly resistant germs. Scientists are also developing revolutionary new treatments that work in radically different ways to any previous medicine. For example, some research labs are already home to nanorobots that may one day navigate through our bloodstream, identify illnesses, and kill pathogens and cancerous cells. Microorganisms may have 4 billion years of cumulative experience fighting organic enemies, but they have exactly 0 experience fighting bionic predators, and would therefore find it doubly difficult to evolve effective defenses. So while we cannot be certain that some new Ebola outbreak or an unknown flu strain won't sweep across the globe and kill millions, we will not regard it as an inevitable natural calamity. Rather, we will see it as an inexcusable human failure and demand the heads of those responsible. When in late summer 2014, it seemed for a few terrifying weeks that Ebola was gaining the upper hand over the global health authorities, investigative committees were hastily set up. An initial report published on 18 October 2014 criticized the World Health Organization for its unsatisfactory reaction to the outbreak, blaming the epidemic on corruption and inefficiency in the WHO's Africa branch. Further, criticism was leveled at the international community as a whole for not responding quickly and forcefully enough. Such criticism assumes that humankind has the knowledge and tools to prevent plagues, and if an epidemic nevertheless gets out of control, it is due to human incompetence rather than divine anger. Similarly, the fact that AIDS continued to infect and kill millions in sub-Saharan Africa, years after doctors had understood its mechanisms, is rightly seen as a result of human failings rather than of cruel fortune. So, in the struggle against natural calamities such as AIDS and Ebola, the scales are tipping in humanity's favor. But what about the dangers inherent in human nature itself? Biotechnology enables us to defeat bacteria and viruses, but it simultaneously turns humans themselves into an unprecedented threat. The same tools that enable doctors to quickly identify and cure new illnesses may also enable armies and terrorists to engineer even more terrible diseases and doomsday pathogens. It is therefore likely that major epidemics will continue to endanger humankind in the future only if humankind itself creates them, in the service of some ruthless ideology. The era when humankind stood helpless before natural epidemics is probably over, but we may come to miss it. Breaking the law of jungle. The third piece of good news is that wars too are disappearing. Throughout history, most humans took war for granted, whereas peace was a temporary and precarious state. International relations were governed by the law of the jungle, according to which, even if two polities lived in peace, war always remained an option. For example, even though Germany and France were at peace in 1913, everybody knew that they might be at each other's throats in 1914. Whenever politicians, generals, business people, and ordinary citizens made plans for the future, they always left room for war. From the Stone Age to the Age of Steam, and from the Arctic to the Sahara, every person on Earth knew that at any moment, the neighbors might invade their territory, defeat their army, slaughter their people, and occupy their land. During the second half of the 20th century, this law of the jungle has finally been broken, if not rescinded. In most areas, wars become rarer than ever. Whereas in ancient agricultural societies, human violence caused about 15% of all deaths. During the 20th century, violence caused only 5% of deaths, and in the early 21st century, it is responsible for about 1% of global mortality. In 2012, about 56 people died throughout the world. 620,000 of them died due to human violence, war killed 120,000 people, and crime killed another 500,000. In contrast, 800,000 committed suicide and 1.5 million died of diabetes. Sugar is now more dangerous than gunpowder. Even more importantly, a growing segment of humankind has come to see war as simply inconceivable. For the first time in history, when governments, corporations, and private individuals consider the immediate future, many of them don't think about war as a likely event. Nuclear weapons have turned war between superpowers into a mad act of collective suicide, and therefore forced the most powerful nations on Earth to find alternative and peaceful ways to resolve conflicts. Simultaneously, the global economy has been transformed from a material-based economy into a knowledge-based economy. Previously, the main sources of wealth were material assets, such as gold mines, wheat fields, and oil wells. Today, the main source of wealth is knowledge, and whereas you can conquer oil fields through war, you cannot acquire knowledge that way. Hence, as knowledge became the most important economic resource, the profitability of war declined and wars became increasingly restricted to those parts of the world, such as the Middle East and Central Africa, where the economies are still old-fashioned material-based economies. In 1998, it made sense for Rwanda to seize and loot the rich coltan mines of neighboring Congo because this ore was in high demand for the manufacture of mobile phones and laptops, and Congo held 80% of the world's coltan reserves. Rwanda earned $240 million annually from the looted coltan. For poor Rwanda, that was a lot of money. In contrast, it would have made no sense for China to invade California and seize Silicon Valley, for even if the Chinese could somehow prevail on the battlefield. There were no silicon mines to loot in Silicon Valley. Instead, the Chinese have earned billions of dollars from cooperating with high-tech giants such as Apple and Microsoft, buying their software and manufacturing their products. What Rwanda earned from an entire year of looting Congolese coltan, the Chinese earned in a single day of peaceful commerce. In consequence, the word peace has acquired a new meaning. Previous generations thought about peace as a temporary absence of war. Today, we think about peace as the implausibility of war. When in 1913 people said that there was peace between France and Germany, they meant that there is no war going on at present between France and Germany. But who knows what next year will bring. When today we say that there is peace between France and Germany, we mean that it is inconceivable under any foreseeable circumstances that war might break out between them. Such peace prevails not only between France and Germany, but between most, though not all, countries. There is no scenario for a serious war breaking out next year between Germany and Poland, between Indonesia and the Philippines, or between Brazil and Uruguay. This new peace is not just a hippie fantasy. Power-hungry governments and greedy corporations also count on it. When Mercedes plans its sales strategy in Eastern Europe, it discounts the possibility that Germany might conquer Poland. A corporation importing cheap laborers from the Philippines is not worried that Indonesia might invade the Philippines next year. When the Brazilian government convenes to discuss next year's budget, it's unimaginable that the Brazilian defense minister will rise from his seat, bang his fist on the table and shout, "Just a minute, what if we want to invade and conquer Uruguay? You didn't take that into account. We have to put aside $5 million to finance this conquest." Of course, there are a few places where defense ministers still say such things, and there are reasons where the new peace has failed to take root. I know this is very well because I live in one of those regions, but these are exceptions. There is no guarantee, of course, that the new peace will hold indefinitely. Just as nuclear weapons made the new peace possible in the first place, so future technological developments might set the stage for new kinds of war. In particular, cyber warfare may destabilize the world by giving even small countries and non-state actors the ability to fight superpowers effectively. When the USA fought Iraq in 2003, it brought havoc to Baghdad and Mosul, but not a single bomb was dropped on Los Angeles or Chicago. In the future, though a country such as North Korea or Iran could use logic bombs to shut down the power in California, blow up refineries in Texas and cause trains to collide in Michigan, logic bombs are malicious software codes planted in peacetime and operated at a distance. It is highly likely that networks controlling vital infrastructure facilities in the USA and many other countries are already crammed with such codes. However, we should not confuse ability with motivation. Though cyber warfare introduces new means of destruction, it does not necessarily add new incentives to use them. Over the last 70 years, humankind has broken not only the law of jungle, but also the Chekhov law. Anton Chekhov famously said that a gun appearing in the first act of a play will inevitably be fired in the third. Throughout history, if kings and emperors acquired some new weapon, sooner or later they were tempted to use it. Since 1945, however, humankind has learned to resist this temptation. The gun that appeared in the first act of the Cold War was never fired. By now, we are accustomed to living in a world full of undropped bombs and unlaunched missiles, and have become experts in breaking both the law of jungle and the Chekhov law. If these laws ever do catch up with us, it will be our own fault, not our inescapable destiny. What about terrorism then? Even if central governments and powerful states have learned restraint, terrorists might have no such qualms about using new and destructive weapons. That is certainly a worrying possibility. However, terrorism is a strategy of weakness adopted by those who lack access to real power. At least in the past, terrorism worked by spreading fear rather than by causing significant material damage. Terrorists usually don't have the strength to defeat an army, occupy a country, or destroy entire cities. Whereas in 2010, obesity and related illness killed about 3 million people, Terrorists killed a total of 7,697 people across the globe, most of them in developing countries. For the average American or European, Coca-Cola poses a far deadlier threat than Al-Qaeda. How then do terrorists manage to dominate the headlines and change the political situation throughout the world? By provoking their enemies to overreact. In essence, terrorism is a show. Terrorists stage a terrifying spectacle of violence that captures our imagination and makes us feel as if we are sliding back into medieval chaos. Consequently, states often feel obliged to react to the theater of terrorism, with a show of security orchestrating immense displays of force, such as the persecution of entire populations or the invasion of foreign countries. In most cases, their overreaction to terrorism poses a far greater threat to our security than the terrorists themselves. Terrorists are like a fly that tries to destroy a china shop. The fly is so weak that it cannot budge even a single teacup, so it finds a bull, gets inside its ear, and starts buzzing. The bull goes wild with fear and anger, and destroys the china shop. This is what happened in the Middle East in the last decade. Islamic fundamentalists could never have toppled Saddam Hussein by themselves. Instead, they enraged the USA by the 9/11 attacks, and the USA destroyed the Middle Eastern china shop for them. Now they flourish in their wreckage. By themselves, terrorists are too weak to drag us back to the Middle Ages and re-establish the jungle law. They may provoke us, but in the end, it all depends on our reactions. If the jungle law comes back into force, it will not be the fault of terrorists. Famine, plague, and war will probably continue to claim millions of victims in the coming decades, yet they are no longer unavoidable tragedies beyond the understanding and control of a helpless humanity. Instead, they have become manageable challenges. This does not belittle the suffering of hundreds of peoples of poverty-stricken humans, of the millions felt each year by malaria, AIDS, and tuberculosis, or of the millions trapped in violent, vicious circles in Syria, the Congo, or Afghanistan. The message is not that famine, plague, and war have completely disappeared from the face of the earth, and that we should stop worrying about them. Just the opposite. Throughout the history, people felt these were unsolvable problems, so there was no point trying to put an end to them. People prayed to God for miracles, but they themselves did not seriously attempt to exterminate famine, plague, and war. Those arguing that the world of 2016 is as hungry, sick, and violent as it was in 1916 perpetuate this old-age defeatist view. They imply that all the huge efforts humans have made during the 20th century have achieved nothing, and that medical research, economic reforms, and peace initiatives have all been in vain. If so, what is the point of investing our time and resources in further medical research, novel economic reforms, or new peace initiatives? Acknowledging our past achievements sends a message of hope and responsibility, encouraging us to make even greater efforts in the future. Given our 20th century accomplishments, if people continue to suffer from famine, plague, and war, we cannot blame it on nature or on God. It is within our power to make things better and to reduce the incidence of suffering even further. Yet appreciating the magnitude of our achievements carries another message. History does not tolerate a vacuum. If incidences of famine, plague, and war are decreasing, something is bound to take their place on the human agenda. We had better think very carefully what is going to be. Otherwise, we might gain complete victory in the old battlefields, only to be caught completely unaware on entirely new fronts. What are the projects that will replace famine, plague, and war at the top of the human agenda in the 21st century? Our central project will be to protect humankind and the planet as a whole from the dangers inherent in our power. We have managed to bring famine, plague, and war under control, thanks largely to our phenomenal economic growth. which provides us with abundant food, medicine, energy, and raw materials. Yet this same growth destabilizes the ecological equilibrium of the planet in myriad ways, which we have only begun to explore. Humankind has been late in acknowledging this danger and has so far done very little about it. Despite all the talk of pollution, global warming, and climate change, most countries have yet to make any serious economic or political sacrifices to improve the situation. When the moment comes to choose between economic growth and ecological stability, politicians, CEOs, and voters almost always prefer growth. In the 21st century, we shall have to do better if we are to avoid catastrophe. What else will humanity strive for? Would we be content merely to count our blessings, keep famine, plague, and war at bay, and protect ecological equilibrium? That might indeed be the wisest course of action, but humankind is unlikely to follow it. Humans are rarely satisfied with what they already have. The most common reaction of the human mind to achievements is not satisfaction, but craving for more. Humans are always on the lookout for something better, bigger, tastier. When humankind possesses enormous new powers, and when the threat of famine, plague, and war is finally lifted, what will we do with ourselves? What will the scientists, investors, bankers, and presidents do all the day? Write poetry? Success breeds ambition, and our recent achievements are now pushing humankind to set itself even more daring goals. Having secured unprecedented levels of prosperity, health, and harmony, and given our past record and our current values, humanity's next targets are likely to be immortality, happiness, and divinity. Having reduced mortality from starvation, disease, and violence, we will now aim to overcome old age and even death itself. Having saved people from abject misery, we will now aim to make them positively happy. And having raised humanity above the beastly level of survival struggles, we will now aim to upgrade humans into gods and turn Homo sapiens into Homo Deus.